Family, this is Anjanette Potter, also known as Adam's Rib, and you are listening to Fridays Live at Midnight. So I know tonight was supposed to be Eclectic Weekends, Eclectic Music Geek. I'm pushing that back another week. So next week will be me celebrating Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston, because August is Michael Jackson's birthday. I also found out that I think it's Whitney Houston's birthday as well. So there will be happy birthday to both of them. I also am going to do my RIPs for the people who I was going to RIP that same Friday. So the following Friday, which will be, I think, September 5th, I will be able to dedicate the entire program to freestyle and Latin hip hop. I actually found the information that I was looking for in Latin hip hop as I was finishing the playlist for Latin freestyle. So I'm going to just do those, because Latin freestyle is actually a bit of a precursor to Latin hip hop, to the Latin Americans' contributions. So one of the reasons I remember saying that how Donald Trump talked about the Latin Americans is one of the reasons why I didn't vote for him. And the way that he talked about immigrants in general. So when I was a very young adult, and even a very young African American adult or Black adult, however you want to term that, one of the things that white supremacy or racist white people have taught me, if you really want to find out where somebody is, listen to how they talk about immigrants. Listen to how they talk about immigrants. Listen how they talk about people of color, even if those people of color are not your ethnicity. Because especially as a African American, especially as a Black person, whatever terms you want to give our people, you really have to listen to how people talk about foreigners. And I've learned that especially about the white community, because what they say about those people, you may have heard some of that stuff before. So I can remember when I was younger working in the salons, because people tend to treat hairdressers like we're invisible sometimes. I would hear a lot of the conversations concerning Latin Americans. And much of what I heard mirrored what these same stereotypes that have been said about African Americans. And I remember, like I said before, I've been watching a lot of old TV programs, and some of especially the old sitcoms. And one of the things about older sitcoms and older TV, if you watch it, if you go back far enough, as a woman and as a feminist, you find out where we were as a country, racially. You also find out where we were as a country as far as sexism and women's issues go. So, and they tell you a lot about racism. They also teach you a lot about women's rights. Some of my faves come out of the Norman Lear sect, but really, to be perfectly honest with you, you could watch any old movie or old sitcom, and it can give you some insight into how things were. So let's say you look at a 1950s sitcom. You look at Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet, Father Knows Best. And Father Knows Best is funny because I think that's the one I remember him being Marcus Welby in the 70s. And so I happened to be setting up and saw one of the reruns for Father Knows Best and realized just how long this man had been acting. So if you look at those sitcoms, one thing you notice is the absence of Black people, or really any people of color. So that, and I remember reading an article. Let's focus for a minute on Ozzie and Harriet. I remember saying at one point, when the religious right were saying, well, let's go back to the good old days of America. And I said, I'm really leery of really, really old white men who romanticize the quote good old days, because they were not good old days for everyone. They weren't good old days for women. They weren't good old days for people of color, and especially Black people. And much of what you saw on your television at that time was not the reality for most families, including white families. And right after I said that, Tracy Nelson, who is the granddaughter of Ozzie and Harriet, talked about what her grandmother, portrayed by Harriet Nelson, as Harriet Nelson, was really like versus what she was like on their screens. So she went forward to say the Harriet Nelson that America was in love with, who was the quintessential housewife, was not the reality for who her grandmother really was. Nor was the Ozzie Nelson a accurate portrayal of her grandfather. In fact, if you remember, I think her father, I think Ricky Nelson might have been her father. Or David Nelson. You'd have to look it up, and my apologies to Ms. Nelson if I'm not getting, it right when it comes to, but I think she might have been Rick Nelson's daughter. So if you were a teenage girl during that period, you might remember that David and Ricky especially Ricky Nelson, was kind of one of the earliest teen heartthrobs. Teenage girls in the 50s he might have been one of the earliest guys that that young girls had his picture up on their bedroom walls as teenagers, and had crushes on him and what have you. A perfectly healthy expression of teenhood at that time, because crushes kind of help you know who you are into. They let you know that it's normal to, have feelings toward the opposite gender or same gender, depending on how you feel about heteronormative expressions of love versus normative expressions of love. But they're usually the opening to dating and subsequently marriage. And so one of the reasons I've said that the whole attack against single mothers is really an attack from Satan is because it is. Because most of the warfare against single moms is birthed out of very archaic attitudes toward women, sex, and marriage. And, you know, how women are viewed through the male gaze. So I watched a episode of the show What's Happening. And like I said before, I'm kind of there now where I'm watching a lot of old sitcoms. I've been watching old reruns of Half and Half. And they let you know how far you've come as far as your education towards certain things. So different tropes about women kind of let you know how women are viewed through, not only through the male gaze, but also through the white male gaze. Because there are differences in how women are viewed. So What's Happening has one of my favorite funny women in comedy. And that is a woman named Shirley Hemphill. And I may do a podcast on Miss Shirley in fact, I think I will, for my In Stitches blog. One of the reasons I did see a recent thing where they talked about Not Forgotten, and they mentioned her on Comedy Hype. So if you had a Black childhood, then you remember Miss Shirley Hemphill because you remember What's Happening. But you also, if you remember her on What's Happening, you also remember her as a very successful and funny stand-up comedian. So she was one of the people, like a lot of people don't realize that many people in television, before they got their roles on sitcoms, were actually stand-up comedians. Jimmy J.J. Walker from Good Times was a successful stand-up comedian before he landed that role. I saw him do stand-up on Soul Train. I think I saw Miss Hemphill do stand-up on Soul Train, as well as Marsha Warfield. Marsha is still in the land of the living, thank God. Miss Shirley, if Miss Shirley were still living, I would definitely be following her on social media. She's one of my favorite funny women. And not just because, you know, we have matching demographics. You know, I'm a heavy set. You know, I just recently talked about my own struggles with weight and how in just recent months or weeks, I've been on the south side of 200 pounds for the first time in a while, to the point where my daughter's friends who follow me on social media or ever so often click on my recordings have told my daughter, gosh, your mom has really dropped weight. I wasn't doing it intentionally, but I still, you know, thank you. I'm kind of scared because it had, you know, I've had health issues here recently. So it always scares me when my health issues turn into weight loss. Because even though that might be aesthetically pleasing to someone who doesn't like heavy set, dark complected Black women, it gives me a scare because I do have issues with diabetes. And so typically when you have especially when you're struggling with your sugar levels and you're having weight issues, it can be very scary. Diabetes was linked to my father's death. And so it's, kind of, a little bit scary to me. I try not to let anybody that's close to me worry about it. But you still don't want to stay forever worrying about your sugar levels. You want to at some point overcome them and have, victory over them, which I have the ability to do because I'm a born again Christian. And other things that accompany high sugar levels. I have been, so I've been in prayer about that, and, other things that come with that, so that I can enjoy, my life. So, back to Miss Henfield. The topic of the episode that I looked at had to do with Shirley not being able to get a date. Now, in all the years that I watched What's Happening, one of my favorite shows, going to remain one of my favorite shows, one of the things I thought about was I never heard, even though Rerun was heavy, we never really heard any shows like they picked up. There was a lot of fat. I never realized the amount of fat shaming that was on What's Happening until I started watching What's Happening again. And I remember the jokes, not only about Shirley's weight, but also about Rerun's weight and about the mother's weight. So, the mother on What's Happening was also played by a favorite actress of mine named Mabel King. So if you're a Broadway fan, Miss King did a lot of stage work before she became the mom or the matriarch on What's Happening. She was also, if you're a Motown fan and you're a fan of The Wiz, you remember her playing the Wicked Witch. She was the Wicked Witch that had the flying monkeys in the Motown version of The Wiz that was made into a movie. Now, as a grown person, I read, I guess some of the reviews weren't very good, but I think that as Black people during that time, we were so happy to see The Wiz be made, number one, into a movie, because I remember reading about The Wiz being a Broadway show. And for those of you who don't understand, The Wiz is sort of a Black version of The Wizard of Oz, which starred Judy Garland as a very young Dorothy. Well, The Wiz was sort of a Black version of that. And it starred Stephanie Mills as a very young, I think she was about 17 or 18 years old during that time. And she was the first Black Dorothy. And so Motown decided to make it into a movie starring Diana Ross. So they kind of aged Dorothy, because at the time, I think Miss Ross was in her 30s. Nothing wrong with that. I had no problems with it. She did a pretty good job with it. Her and Michael Jackson as the Scarecrow. My dude Nipsey Russell as the Tin Man. Ted Ross as the Lion, singing one of my favorite songs, Mean Old Lion. And Mean Old Lion, and I'm trying to remember. Anyway, The Wiz. So I remember that being, a big deal, and I remember watching it. And it was really good. I mean, I remember enjoying it. I remember enjoying it a lot. And so there we go. That's where I remember, not only do I remember Miss King from What's Happening, I also remember her from The Wiz. And I believe she played the part that she played for the movie in the actual Broadway play. Now, I got to see the traveling version of the Broadway play when I was, I would say, probably middle school age. either elementary or middle school age. And it was an awesome thing to see. Very awesome. If they ever decide to do a review, or if they ever decide to do the stage play ever again, as an African American parent, I would advise that you get to see, that you take your kids to see it. It is important for children of color, especially Black children, to be able to see stage plays that are staged around us. Because it is important for us to see our history and our lineage in different things, so that we don't believe the whitewashed version of us never having taken place in anything. Anyway, back to what's happening. So Miss King, along with Fred Berry as Rerun, and Miss Hempfield as Shirley on the show, were fat shamed a lot. And so there were a lot of fat jokes. And in this episode, there were definitely a lot of fat jokes. And most fat shaming, when it's a heavy person, will have to do with their physical appearance, the inability to have a love life, or how much the person can put away. And when I say put away, how much they can eat. And so this episode was no different. There were jokes about Shirley's eating habits. There were, Shirley and Rerun exchanged a lot of fat jokes between the two of them. And there was a big deal. The whole episode was around Shirley's ability to find a date, to go to a party. And I kept wondering throughout this whole thing, why is it such an issue that she can't go alone? Because I could remember when I was younger, a lot of adults showed up to parties by themselves. Now, whether or not they left alone was a horse of another color. Because not only did I see people show up to some of the gatherings that my different family members of mine hosted alone, I also saw them, wind up talking to other adults that came along and wind up hooking up. So there was a big deal about her not having a date. The three main teenagers in what's happening, which would be Raj, Dwayne, the cute one, and Fred Berry as Rerun. Little side note, Fred Berry, if you've ever watched one of the shows and see Rerun dance and think, dang, he moves. I remember my grandmother used to say, because we used to watch it, and my grandmother was saying, he is really light on his feet for him to be so heavy. And my grandmother was heavy. And so, a little digging, Mr. Berry was actually one of the members of a Black dance troupe called the Lockers, along with Shabadoo, a guy who I thought was really, really cute, and Latin, that was a part of the group. And so, Fred Berry, along with singer Tony Basil, were both parts of the Lockers. So one of the reasons he's danced so well is because he had a background in dancing. And so, they're going through, them being the nice gentlemen that they are doing their level best to try to get Shirley a date so she can come to this party that Shirley probably could have went to anyway as a solo person. How society views single women shows up through tropes. The way the male gaze falls upon women, period, usually takes the form of a trope. And through tropes, we get to stereotype different types of people. So Shirley would have been the heavy-set Black woman. Now, what other subcategory you would put Shirley in depends on how you feel about her type of woman. She might either become a mammy, which highly unlikely because she was kind of nurturing, but it was a kind of nurturing that you had to dig because she was also very tell it like it is. So there was also a little bit of sister as serpentine or, angry black woman beneath her as well. Loud and rude. So I always think it's interesting when people put these labels on women, and especially black women, because a lot of times the label is sort of a way, just like the whole Jezebel thing. And I've taught on this before. Jezebel, angry black woman, and mammy are different labels that are rooted in racism and really got their start on the plantation. Now, Jezebel is very controversial because Jezebel was used to label black women on the plantation, to hypersexualize us, to remove any type of fault toward anyone who wanted to sexually violate us. So it is very horrible for a black woman to be called a Jezebel spirit, because it is a label that is grounded and rooted in white men. I remember this one quote that I post on a regular basis by Zora Neale Hurston, and one of the things she said was, if you are silent about your pain, that they will murder you and say you liked it. Now, that's grounded and rooted in the Jezebel teaching, because it basically tells a man, well, if I force it on her, she really wanted it anyway. I only gave her what she really wanted in the first place. Okay. And it's the same thing with the whole black and angry thing. So I remember here recently a clip of rapper Sukiana made the lines, and it was about a clip of her making a remark when she landed over in London. I'm not going to say what she said because it was kind of rude, but I don't really want to talk about her in so much because I like Sukiana. I remember watching the show when Sukiana first came on there. And just like a lot of people, Sukiana is a work in progress, because she has now said recently that she wants to be a little more classy and not carry herself so rough. And I don't have a problem with that. I believe that you have the right to change your life for the better anytime you want. Like me, Sukiana, I think, is a single mom. So she's had children that she's been raising. And she's, trying to make her life better so she can make her kids' way of life better. And there's nothing wrong with that. The problem that I have with people, the number one problem that I had was a black commentator said, you don't see white people going to places and acting a fool? Do you see, to me, with divestors and these black people, and I love my people, who swear up and down that white people are a better choice when it comes to who to mate up with, are very blinded to the fact that white people oftentimes do stuff to make other white people not want to own them or want to disown them. On a regular basis, they do things that make you think, we can't take y'all nowhere. Okay? But that y'all seem to be blinded to that. Now, my problem is when the loud black woman who, you know, acts like, you know, she can't be taken out of her element, depending on what her element is, gets used to be labeled, used as a label and a weapon against all black women. To the point where you have men who share our colors saying they don't want to date us because we're not good marriage material. Never mind, all of us are not that type of person. So I'm gonna tell a little bit of background. If you are a Motown fan and you've watched one of the 90,000 retrospectives and biographies about Motown, you remember Mr. Berry Gordy saying that Motown had a charm school. And one of the reasons for the charm school was because, number one, many of the acts that he was managing through Motown were teenagers. Many of them were very young. You forget how young, because now they've been around forever, but you forget how young many of them were when they started out. They were teens. They were just barely out of high school. Many of them from what they call the Brewster Projects over in Detroit. So they were from the projects. People always want to talk about black folks in the projects. So these was folks that was from some of them from the projects, not all of them. And there's no shame in being from the projects. Okay, many of us have had to live places because we could not afford to live other places. Some, give y'all some realness there. Two of my uncles lived in the projects in Massillon, Ohio, what we considered to be the projects then. And so there's no shame in living where you can afford to live. Yeah, I'm gonna take a heavy load off of some of y'all right there. So if you want some common ground, there were many acts in Motown that at the time they got signed with Motown, lived in some of the projects there. Some of them didn't live in the projects. Some of them just lived in areas that were just not real, expensive to live in. But one of Mr. Gordy's ideas for the charm school was to get them ready so that they could be able to be taken anywhere and perform anywhere. And it wasn't to teach them to be ashamed of being black. It's because he was a man with a vision. And he had a vision toward them being able to perform before the Queen, before queens and kings, and before many other people that people from their background may not see on a regular basis. But because of his vision for them, being able to go different places and perform and not have any place that they could not be able to perform. And many of it because, unfortunately, how a lot of black people were viewed. So while the goal was not to whiten them up and make them feel bad about being black, he also had the realization that, about how racism shaped the view of many people's view of black people during that time. So he wanted them to be able to go anywhere and perform anywhere and not be the person that we look at and go, we can't take you nowhere. Like, he did not want that to be able to be said about anybody at Motown, about any of their artists. Now, of course, if you read up on any of the artists, they still had, many of them still had personal issues that tended to overshadow their musical work. Very, very sad, but very, very true. And so when you hear this stuff about loud black women and different stuff like that, like I said before, I believe white supremacy has done such a head job on us as a people that you have black women and black men no longer thinking that each other are viable candidates for marriage. Now, how you feel about that, says a lot, because like I said, there are many people in the Black community that are not big on interracial marriages because they see them as the breakdown of the Black community. I understand that viewpoint to a degree. I can remember in my pro-Black days, wanting children that were representative of, Black people being together and being unified. Unfortunately, my relationship with their fathers didn't reflect that, because of their fathers abandoning them. I think when we sit over and talk about Black women being single moms, we have to reckon with the fact that every one of these kids has a father. And whether or not the father is in the picture is really his own fault. If you really have a problem with single motherhood, then you need to have a problem with abandoned Black babies. There's a problem when a father takes a walk says he's going for cigarettes and never comes back. Now, in my work within the Christian community of Black people, I've done nothing but encourage deadbeat dads, absent parents, both male and female, to get back in touch with the kids that they've abandoned and try to heal that relationship. Now, as born-again Christians, we're supposed to be salt and light. Salt, as you know, when you put salt in a food, when you cannot unsalt food that's been salted. So salt adds flavor. Salt also is a preservative. At one point, it was a preservative to keep food from spoiling, or at least slow down any spoiling of food, especially meat. So you're supposed to be able to slow down any type of rotting. You are also light, which means illumination. No, we talk about staying woke. Well, if you're if you're claiming Jesus Christ is your Lord, you're reading your Bible, and you claim a relationship with Christ, how does anybody get to be more woke than you are? You should be woke to the condition of this world. You should be woke to praying for the condition of this world. You should be one of the ones that is more, since we possess the truth, and the light, which is Jesus Christ, and we are the way to the Father, how does somebody get to be more woke than you are? So why am I seeing all these teachings that are geared to pry women's panties from? How are you How are you a leader and women can't even follow you to the King? We can't follow you to the King of Kings because you're too busy trying to get in our panties. And your pastors are too busy making up teachings that allow you to take advantage of us sexually. No one should be more woke than you. No one should be more woke than you. If nothing else, you should be able to open up the Word of God and read the Word of God. So one of the ways that prioritizing your relationship with Christ protects you when it comes to spiritual abuse is that it helps you to see abuse happening. If you're under a pastor and that pastor has a habit, it helps you to set standards. If you're under a pastor and that pastor is involved in human trafficking, it can show you how to pray for the church. I don't believe that people can have an actual relationship. I don't believe that you can have a relationship with Christ, be saved, and not be convicted of sin. And when I say sin, I'm not talking about, I had a conversation with someone from a denomination that I used to be a part of, and they had the nerve to talk about saying no to a man being sin. I am convinced that there is this little demon with cross-eyed, a propeller on his head that walks around and afflicts especially women with this demonic stupidity of not being able to tell a man no to sin. If it's already spelled out in the Bible, you already know that it's wrong. You don't need 50 angel visitations and 500 dreams for you to know to say no to fornication. Okay? I did a teaching on how to know if you're worshiping the penis god. And I did it because I see so many women being in danger because they think that anything a man does that's a little bit positive is curing the whole issue of men being out of order. And it is not. I have a little bit of emergency run that I need to take. So I'm going to talk about this again Monday night. But as I said before, as women especially, if a man is calling himself being the leader of your home and he is not following the God that you are serving, you don't need to follow him. It is important that you're not just following somebody that know how to hang a few good phrases together, but actually knows how to lead your family in prayer, how to be there for you. Are they really truly following? One way to know that is what they're doing with their penis. If they're spending more of your time trying to convince you to go to bed with them, they ain't following God. What a man does with his penis tells you a lot. And I'm not talking about judging men's sexual past. Where are they at now? What are they doing now with their life? If they say they follow God, any form of God, but especially the Judeo-Christian concept of God, which is who most born-again Christians follow. If they say they are following God and they're not even doing the basics of what they should be doing as a man of God, following whoever you follow, then you need to think twice. Don't be digmatized. Think twice about whether or not this is a man you and your children should follow. So I'm going to see you guys Monday because I really need to run here quick. Enjoy your weekend, and I will talk to you Monday night. Be at peace.